Ever since I heard about Indian dwarf mudskippers from Tozawa tanks, I have been in love with them. I'm absolutely obsessed with oddball fish, and I just love how weird and unique they are, but oftentimes they come with specialized care requirements, and I'm currently still in my lazy fishkeeper phase where, because of an unexpected health issue, I just can't deal with a lot, right? So after a year plus of keeping these mudskippers, I'm just gonna lay it all out there for you. How difficult exactly is it to maintain a brackish aquarium? Are they super hardy or really high maintenance? And do I think I will still be keeping them? Now, obviously, the first problem I ran into was I wanted this specific type of mudskipper species, and most local fish stores don't carry a lot of brackish fish options. And this particular species comes from the Bay of Bombay, so the coastlines of India to Southeast Asia. And like most smaller mudskippers, they're not necessarily the most colorful fish out there. So you're gonna get kind of a light brownish gray with, they do have some striking, like striping on their back sometimes. And if you look closely, I was surprised to see kind of a white, bluish, pearly spotting on the back, which was really pretty. And thankfully, my local fish store, Aqua Imports, they do have online ordering. So I was able to get on their wait list, and then in the meantime, cycle my brackish aquarium, and then they notified me when they were available and I could do local pickup. At the time, they were about $17 each, and they were eating freeze-dried mysis shrimp. The second issue I ran into is that while they are a smaller mudskipper species and are relatively peaceful for a mudskipper, they're still pretty territorial. So when you go on most websites, they say that the Indian dwarf mudskipper can get to about 4 inches long, but most of them stay around 2.5 inches. So they recommend doing like a 12-inch by 12-inch footprint for each of them. And that means you could theoretically keep 3 in a 20-gallon long aquarium like this one. Well, the problem is my mudskippers grew bigger than that. So I would say Alex, the smaller one, is about 3 inches from head to tail. And then Notch is a nice and hefty 3.5 inches. So for at least our setup, 2 mudskippers works really well for our 20-gallon long. Another thing is, while mudskippers are technically amphibious, meaning they can breathe out in the air as well as underwater, depending on the species of mudskipper, at least this species in particular, prefers breathing in air. Like I would say my mudskippers are 99% of the time out of the water, basically making them a land dweller. So you've got to have a lot more land for them to have their own separate territories on. Now there's a couple ways you can do your tank setup. So option 1 is kind of like a paludarium, where you would have a little bit of substrate on the bottom of the tank and then maybe like a little bit of water covering that substrate. And you would want the substrate to be more of a beach kind of format where it's, you know, lower on one side where there's water, and then it comes higher on the other side where there's more land. Most people like to use sand as their substrate because mud can get incredibly messy. However, there are some hardcore mudskipper keepers out there who have made specialized drainage systems that allow them to create the high and low tides in their aquarium. And they have found or kind of made specialized recipes for the mud, which is like a mixture of fire clay and sand and pond plant soil and other magical things, so that the mud is the perfect consistency where it's soft enough to allow the mudskippers to create burrows if they want, but also firm enough that it won't dissolve whenever there's tides. It's craziness. The second option is what I saw Zenzo from Tozawa tanks do, which is you're gonna have a deeper water setup like this, and then the land is gonna be closer to the top of the tank. And in my case, my substrate is aragonite sand, by the way, just because I had it for my African cichlids, the shell dwellers I kept, because I have really soft water and aragonite sand is really good at keeping that pH, GH, KH higher, like they appreciate it. Same with the mudskippers, they like that higher pH. And then for the land part, I kind of have a U-shaped configuration where it's a mixture of rock, which I got aquascaping rock, very expensive, don't do that, get cheaper rock. And then the other combination is using kind of suction cup turtle decor, which turtles need to come out of the water as well. And that's worked out really well for me. Sloped ramps are not that important in my opinion to allow them to get in and out of the water. I have absolutely, their name is Mudskipper. I've seen them completely like jump in and out of the water onto like steep surfaces because in the wild, don't forget, they have that suction cup like pelvic fin that's underneath their chest and it allows them to stick onto and climb, very steep mangrove roots that come out of the water, or in this case in the tank, onto glass. So very cool. I just think if you have like land pieces that are kind of at the top of the water, I just make sure to have the water cover those land surfaces a little bit because their skin does need to be moist at all times. You'll sometimes see them rolling on the land, on the water to get all parts of their skin wet. And that way they're able to breathe more easily through their skin, kind of like frogs. That means it's also really important to have a tight fitting lid, not only to prevent their escape since they can climb straight out, but also to raise the humidity in the aquarium. Just because, again, they breathe through their skin, it needs to be damp at all times. I actually use saran wrap to cover all the cracks and nooks and crannies at the top of the lid that's not perfectly sealed, and that really seems to help. And then other tank setup requirements would be obviously have a heater. You want to have a gentle filter of some sort because they're not the best swimmers. I have a sponge filter and then of course, brackish water, which we'll talk about later. Now that I've made sure they each have enough land territory to claim as their own, probably only time I really see them fighting would be during feeding time. So let me explain. Imagine having a pair of ambush predators that really don't do much all day long. Like they might move around a little bit. They call it crutching, where they use their pectoral fins to kind of slowly move across the land. But really what they're relying on is these two beady eyes on the top of their head that look like frog eyes. And they can see 360 degrees and they are very good at seeing outside of the aquarium. So when I start approaching the aquarium, basically the energy level goes from 10% to 100%. Notch basically starts splashing and flailing around and leaping from platform to platform, trying to get at the food before it even has hit the water. And inadvertently, he will stumble his way accidentally over to Alex's territory, and she is going to defend that territory. Thankfully, at least with this species, I have not seen anything amounting to any kind of serious physical damage. There's no biting, no ripped fins, nothing. It's basically Alex like raises that dorsal fin of hers to show that she means business. And then after some posturing, she'll basically, there's some minor chasing, and then Notch will go back to his side of the tank, and then we're cool again. As carnivorous meat eaters, they of course love frozen foods. I usually go for stuff that's around the size of frozen bloodworms, tubifex worms, brine shrimp, that kind of thing. And then I will place like a little pile in each of their territories so that they're completely separated and they can eat in peace. As for dried prepared foods, I really like freeze-dried, the mysis shrimp I mentioned before, brine shrimp, freeze-dried tubifex worms, even Daphnia, just because they float on the surface more. Like I have fed them pellets and flakes and they will eat that, but I really like the foods that float on the surface for a really long time because what they will do is, I have the Easy Flow sponge filter that has some current at the surface and it will gently swirl it around the aquarium. And so it will go to their various platforms and they can just kind of sit there. And it's a little bit of enrichment. They kind of have to, hunt for it and they'll just sit there and try to slurp up the food as it reaches their platform. However, their all-time favorite food would be live baby brine shrimp, which as you know, goes in the water usually. And this is the only food I've ever seen them go dive down into the water to eat. Like most of the time, yes, they could sit at the surface and eat the brine shrimp that come to them, but they know that when I first drop in the brine shrimp, it just kind of pools at the bottom at first, and they will just swim straight down and gulp up as much as they can. So that is one of the rare times that I do see them in the water. I would say feeding them is probably one of the highlights of my day, honestly, like compared to feeding my other aquariums, just because you can train them to eat from your hand. Notch at least is braver and he will come. Alex, she still has not decided to trust me yet, but I usually, you have a flat hand, you put the food in the middle of your hand, Notch will land on my hand, crawl over and eat the food. And yes, you can put the food on your fingertip, but just be aware mudskippers do have little teeth. And so it doesn't hurt, not strong enough to break the skin at this size, but it just kind of feels like, 2 fingernails pinching together again, trying to get that food off your fingertips. So beware. Obviously, one of the biggest annoyances of keeping a mudskipper is they require brackish water. So let's talk about what exactly that means. Most websites recommend they have a specific gravity of 1.005 to 1.015, and that's a really huge range in terms of how much salt to keep in this aquarium. And it's really much, much easier than keeping a saltwater aquarium. Like before this, I kept basically African cichlids, shell dwellers, and they required adding cichlid salt in. It's basically the same amount of difficulty. And so when I looked at the Aquarium Co-op link, the article, which I'll link in the description, it basically said, start with adding about 2 tablespoons of marine salt per gallon, or about 1 1/4 cup of salt per 10 gallons of water. And that was my starting point. And then from there, I can just either add more salt or add more water to get the right specific gravity. Now, when the water evaporates, basically I can see that it's no longer slightly covering and moistening the land platforms. I basically just add some more dechlorinated tap water, and I don't add any more salts because remember, when water evaporates, the salt does not evaporate. However, when I do a water change, I basically estimate about how many gallons I think left the aquarium when I did the water change, and then I add, again, 2 tablespoons of marine salt per gallon, and I adjust the specific gravity based on there. I have a refractometer, so I'm calibrated, and then I'm able to determine exactly how much I need to adjust the salt or water amount by. In general, brackish fish are not very picky at all about the specific gravity and have a fairly wide range, so they're very forgiving. I would say the biggest annoyance for me for brackish aquariums would be the lack of plants. Like, yes, I know there's lots of people who have tried various plants. Based on what Zenzo and several brackish aquarium articles have said, really the only plant is maybe Java fern in very, very mild brackish water can survive. And then other than that, your only option is a mangrove tree, which I don't want to grow a tree. So basically that just means because I don't have plants removing the nitrate from the water, I just have to do more water changes. And it's not that big of a deal since this aquarium is right next to my kitchen sink. In fact, the good thing about having no plants is usually I keep the light off on this aquarium and there's no algae growth really at all. Like we get some sunlight, indirect sunlight from a nearby window. And so for that, I do have a cleanup crew of an amano shrimp and 3 narite snails. And the narite snails are, I would say, a must-have for mudskipper tanks. They're amazing. Not only do they clean off the algae, but because they have the ability to climb out of water and onto land, they will eat any leftover crumbs that the mudskippers leave behind. And that's just like the best. Despite some of the stricter requirements for keeping a mudskipper, I would say that keeping a brackish aquarium really isn't that difficult. And I'm saying this as a lazy fish keeper, I promise. Like, it is actually, after a year plus of keeping this aquarium, it is one of my easiest, lowest maintenance aquariums that I have, because I feel like with the planted tanks, I'm always having to worry about the balancing the light and the nutrients and the algae, and there's just like none of that with this aquarium. The mudskippers themselves are super hardy, you know, ability to live on land versus in the water as well. They can handle a wide range of specific gravity, voracious eaters, and best of all, they have like a ton of interesting behaviors. You know, I talked about them rolling in the water to moisten their backs. They also have that tail that they can kind of use as a spring to leap across to the other side of the aquarium, and just a very interactive wet pet, in my opinion. You know, they recognize me, they kind of keep me company when I'm in the kitchen, and they can eat off my hand. Like, what more could you want from a fish, right? I'm really glad that I decided to step out of my, you know, planted community tank comfort zone and try something new. And I hope you will too. Like, obviously do your research, but a good place to get started is go to Zenzo of Tozawa Tanks, his channel. I love this video over here where he talks about common questions that his viewers have about keeping mudskippers and what amazing creatures they are. So take time to enjoy your aquariums, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.